Spinoza is one of the most challenging figures in the Western tradition. His best metaphysical work, The Ethics, is one of the most difficult books in philosophy. It is notoriously obscure and technical, as Spinoza invents a variety of new terms and attempts to lay out the book like a geometrical proof. At this period in philosophical history, philosophers were extremely impressed both with geometry and the physics of Newton and Leibniz. As a result, they attempted to mimic these mathematical and scientific methods. Thus, to understand the ethics, you must be prepared for obscure mathematical arguments that often hide what is going on. Further, the book is littered with terms that you will be unfamiliar with and ones that you will be familiar with, but that Spinoza has given a distinct meaning. The ethics covers many issues other than ethics. Spinoza is a system builder and believes that our ethical lives, the nature of the good, right action, etc., can only be understood within the context of general philosophy. Thus, part 1 of the ethics focuses on the ultimate ground of all being, that is, God. God is not the God of classical theism. Instead, it is the only substance in the universe and contains all other things in terms of its attributes as modes. Thus, we do not have independent existence, but exist as modes of God. Talking of substance, think of a computer. Lurking in the background are the thoughts of the factory which builds the computer, the parts inside it, and the uses you make of it. Your computer is logically, conceptually, and practically connected to or dependent upon a great many other things. Everything we see is like that. Everything in the world is logically and conceptually connected to many other things. Your computer is also limited by other things. It is a physical thing with borders. Everything in the world is limited by other things. Interconnection and limitation are the hallmarks of our world, and in Spinoza's terms, things are conceived of through other things, as in interconnection or dependence, and finite after their own kind, as in limitation. Can we conceive of something that is not conceived of through other things? Can we think of something that is not finite after its own kind? Spinoza can, and he calls this substance. It is conceived of in itself and absolutely infinite. Substance is what is really real because it exists entirely on its own terms, and ultimately everything else is conceived of via substance. What do we actually experience in the world? Computers, people, books, love, hate, jealousy. Everything we experience in the world can be divided up into two categories: the physical and the mental, which are attributes of substance. Individual things, from thoughts to physical beings, physical things, are modes or modifications of substance. Substance is divided into attributes, and attributes are divided into modes. As mentioned, Spinoza outlines several definitions, propositions, axioms, scholiums, etc., and let's see some of what he has proposed. Definition 7 states, a free thing exists only by the necessity of its own nature, and whose action is determined by itself alone. A thing is constrained if it is fixed by something external to a definite method of existence or action. Axiom 3 states, from a given definite cause, an effect necessarily follows, and on the other hand, if no definite cause be granted, it is impossible that an effect should follow. Axiom 4 states, the knowledge of an effect depends upon and involves the knowledge of a cause. Let's unpack these statements. A thing either exists or acts as a certain way because its inner nature necessitates that it exists or acts that way, or it exists or acts a certain way because something external created it or conditioned it. There is no in between. Everything is either free or unfree. Axiom 3 seems to be fairly uncontroversial, but consider the logic of it pushed to the very end. If a thing does not exist, then it either does not exist because it logically cannot, like a square circle, or because something external has precluded its existence. If a computer did not exist, there would have to be a reason why it did not exist. Later, Spinoza will state that nothing is contingent, but that everything is conditioned to exist and operate in a particular manner. That is the 29th proposition in the book. That is, nothing exists or happens just because. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, understanding a thing or an effect absolutely depends upon knowledge of its cause. If you do not know why a thing exists, then you do not actually understand it. Whatever causes a thing's existence or behavior also dictates its essence. Proposition 27 states, a thing which has been conditioned by God to act in a particular way cannot make itself unconditioned. We will discuss the nature of God later on in this video, but first let's extract a key point here. A thing that has been conditioned to exist or act in a particular way cannot make itself unconditioned. Things and people as well cannot act without being caused to act or without being conditioned to act in a certain way. Proposition 28 makes this more clear, which says, every individual thing which is finite and conditioned cannot be conditioned to act except by a cause other than itself, which is also finite. A chain begins which goes on to infinity. Furthermore, Proposition 32 states, will cannot be called a free cause, but only a necessary cause. His proof of this is that will is a mode of thinking, like intellect, so it cannot exist or act unless it is conditioned to act or exist by something else on to infinity. He means this in the strongest sense. There is no free will, according to Spinoza. Soon, we will see that this also applies to God. Cause and effect is absolute. Now we'll move on to the nature and existence of substance or God. With this framework of rigid cause and effect in mind, let's look at Spinoza's case for the existence and nature of substance, or in what amounts to the same thing, that is God. The very first definition states, by that which is self-caused, I mean that of which the essence involves existence, or that of which the nature is only conceivable as existent. A self-caused thing exists because its nature is to exist. A not existing self-caused thing would be like a square circle. Axiom 7 states that if a thing can be conceived of as non-existing, then its essence does not involve existence. He identifies God as the self-caused and offers three arguments in Proposition 11. He says, God or substance consisting of infinite attributes of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality necessarily exists. This is true because existence belongs to the nature of substance. God is only conceivable as existing. This is Spinoza's version of the Ontological Argument. More classically, the argument runs like this. I can conceive of a greatest possible thing or a greatest possible being, and existence belongs to greatness. So a non-existent greatest possible being would be a contradiction, again like a square circle. The second argument depends on his description of cause and effect. Everything that exists needs a cause, and just as much, a thing needs a reason to not exist. The reason must be internal to the thing or external to it. The reason for the non-existence of a square circle is internal to it. It would involve a contradiction. The reason for the existence of substance is internal to it, as its essence involves existence. If no reason prevents the existence of God, then we must conclude he certainly does exist. Any reason against God's existence must be either internal or external to God, and an external reason would have to be another substance. That other substance would have to be God. The third and final proof is that the potentiality of non-existence is a negation of power, and contrariwise, the potentiality of existence is a power, as is obvious. If only finite beings necessarily exist, then they would have to be more powerful than infinite ones, which is absurd. He goes on to say, for as the potentiality of existence is a power, it follows that in proportion as reality increases in the nature of a thing, so also will it increase its strength for existence. Therefore, a being absolutely infinite, such as God, has from himself an absolutely infinite power of existence, and hence he does absolutely exist. Now we'll move on to discussing the nature of substance or God. Definition 6 states, by God I mean a being absolutely infinite, that is, a substance consisting in infinite attributes of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality. The explanation goes on to say, I say absolutely infinite, not infinite after its kind. For of a thing infinite only after its kind, infinite attributes may be denied. But that which is absolutely infinite contains in its essence whatever expresses reality and involves no negation. First, he says God is a substance. In the course of the argument, this will be changed to the only substance. Second, God is wholly positive, or in other words, God is absolutely affirmative. There is no chance, no holes, no refusals, no lack, nothing faulty or broken or inadequate in God. Therefore, reality is also absolutely positive without any negativity. Descartes argued for multiple substances. He said that thinking and extension are distinct substances, while for Spinoza they are attributes. Spinoza argues that there is only one infinite substance. The argument is found in the discussion of Proposition 8, which states every substance is necessarily infinite. There can only be one substance with an identical attribute, and existence follows from its nature. It cannot be finite because then it would be limited by something else, or there would be two substances with the same attribute. How do we know there is only one substance? First, Spinoza says the true definition of a thing neither involves nor expresses anything beyond the nature of the thing defined. Second, no definition implies a certain number of individuals. The definition of a triangle does not say how many triangles there are. Third, every existent thing needs a cause. Fourth, the cause either has to be in the thing itself or in another thing. So if only 20 people exist, there must be a reason why there are 20 and not 19 or 21 or any other number. He brings these points together by saying, as it has been shown already that existence pertains to the nature of substance, existence must necessarily be included in its definition. And from its definition alone, existence must be reducible. From its definition, we cannot infer the existence of several substances. Therefore, it follows that there is only one substance of the same nature. Proposition 16 states, from the necessity of the divine nature must flow an infinite number of things in infinite ways. All things, that is, all things which can fall within the sphere of the infinite intellect. His proof of this is that we can learn about a thing's properties from its definition. If a thing is infinite, then it has infinite properties. The upshot is that God is the efficient cause of all that can fall within the sphere of an infinite intellect. Proposition 17 states, God acts solely by the laws of his own nature and is not constrained by anyone. The proof of this is that God is the cause of all things, and nothing exists outside him, so nothing can condition him. There can be no cause which moves God to act other than his nature. God is the sole free cause because God alone exists by his nature. But this does not mean God is a free cause because he can choose to make a thing or choose to not make it. That is like saying God could make a square circle. God does not choose to create things, according to Spinoza. Rather, an infinite number of things flow from him with necessity, just like a square's four sides flows from its definition. Intellect and will, as we recognize them, have nothing to do with God. Just because we prize our intellects and will as our highest perfections does not mean they can be attributed to God. Natura, naturans, and natura naturata, we're going to talk about that now. In the discussion of Proposition 28, he says that which is finite is not produced by the absolute nature of any attribute of God. It flows from an attribute considered as modified, for substance and modes make up the sum total of existence. Modes are modifications of the attributes of God, but from God or from any of his attributes, insofar as the latter is modified by a modification, infinite and eternal, a conditioned thing cannot follow. Wherefore, it must follow from or be conditioned for existence and action by God or from one of his attributes, insofar as the latter are modified by some modification which is finite and has a conditioned existence. A chain of conditioned causes begins. But some things must be immediately produced by God, those things which necessarily follow from his nature through the means of his primary attributes. God is the absolute cause of other things, of those things immediately produced by him, but the remote cause of individual things. That which is entirely the result of a chain of causes, or in other words, some mere modifications of attributes, is passive nature, that is, natura naturata. Passive nature is, I think, like pool balls rolling around on a table. It roughly corresponds to our common sense notion of physical causation. The second form of causation, the immediate production of God, is active nature, or natura naturans. Active nature is that which is in itself, or conceived in itself, or through attributes of substance. In other words, God as free cause, and remember that free cause means produced because of God's nature, rather than a free choice or external cause. Lastly, we'll be talking about the trivial afterthoughts that Spinoza has presented in the appendix. There are a few misconceptions yet to be cleared up. The first misconception is the idea that all things in nature act as men themselves act, namely with an end in view. People also think God directs things towards an end, like God made man so that man might worship him. Spinoza's starting point is, that all men are born ignorant of the causes of things, that all have the desire to seek for what is useful to them, and that they are conscious of such desire. From that, it follows we think that we are free because we are conscious of our choices and desires, and we do things for an end, what is useful to us. People only look for final causes, and when these are learned, they stop looking. If they cannot figure out the causes of things from external sources, then they look at themselves and they think about what end would have cost them to bring about such an event. The world really does contain many things which are at our disposal, like eyes for seeing, plants and animals for food, the sun for light, and so on. It is easy to jump to the idea that the whole of nature exists to provide us with such conveniences. Humans are aware that they did not make these things, or some other being must have. Because they see things as means, these things could not have been self created, but rather a creator endowed with human like reason created these things for human use. They see God as ultimately comparable to a human ruler, so everyone figured out that worshipping God would make God love them more than his neighbors. He says people who believe in final causes have created a new mode of argumentation, reduction, not to the impossible but to ignorance. For example, if a stone falls on someone's head and kills him, they ask how could so many circumstances come together to create that event if it was not God's will? If we say the stone fell because the wind was blowing and the man just happened to be walking that way, they will ask why the wind was blowing and why the man was walking that way. If you say the wind blew in from the ocean and the man was invited to his friend's home, for example, they will ask why, and so on and on. Men also formed abstract notions for the explanation of the nature of things like goodness, badness, order, confusion, warmth, cold, beauty, deformity, etc. And from the belief they are free agents rose praise, blame, sin, and merit, etc. Everything which conduces to health and the worship of God they have called good. Everything which hinders these objects they have styled bad. And insofar as people do not know the causes of things, but only imagine they do, they imagine there is an order to nature. When things are easily understood or remembered, they are called well ordered. For the opposite, they are ill ordered. And since we prefer order to confusion, we assume there is an order in nature. It is the same with beauty and ugliness. These are only words for what pleases and displeases us. People are just different and have different tastes. And finally, if everything follows from a perfect God, why are there so many imperfections? Spinoza says that is because God produces infinitely everything, even the things we consider bad.